Clause 8.
Mr Chair.
I call Sue Moroney.
Thank you, Mr Chair, and you've reminded us again that we still haven't found that missing 0.4 of a hectare, which I believe probably does add up to about an acre. So before the end of play tonight, it would actually be really great to find out what's happened to the 0.4 of a hectare if the member in charge of this bill would please enlighten us, because it's obvious by the contributions that this is of concern to the Labour opposition, and we are supporting the bill. So we want to make sure that our votes are being cast in good faith. We are placing some trust in the member on this issue, but to be fair, we'd like to know before the close of play tonight just what the situation is there with that missing calculation there. Mr Chair, Clause 8 is interesting in that this is the Hamilton City Council ensuring that it doesn't have any unforeseen financial liability as a result of having this land vested in it. And I think it's interesting in that the Hamilton City Council has had some real foresight in drafting this particular provision, because did they ever see this national government coming? That's right. The Hamilton City Council have really worked out what this government is going to be up to, because the first thing that they've said is they want to make sure that this is not this land, by being gifted to the Hamilton City Council, being vested in the Hamilton City Council, that it doesn't draw gift duties. And of course we know that the national government, they announced some time ago that they were going to get rid of gift duties. We haven't seen any legislation come before the House yet that I recall. We have? Has it had its first reading? No. Well, I don't recall it. I'm relying on the member in charge of the bill. I remember that the Honourable Peter Dunn made some grand announcements about it, but I do not recall having seen a bill being introduced to do that yet. And of course, Labour has made its position clear on gift duty. We don't believe that it should be abolished. And here we are with the Hamilton City Council saying, well, we don't want it. We don't want to make sure. We want to make sure that we don't land with gift duties and the vesting of this land to us. But the next one's even more interesting, because in Part B of Clause 8, they've said, look, we also want to make sure that it's not subject to GST, the Goods and Services Tax Act. Well, look, did they ever see what this national government was going to get up to? Because I'm sure when they drafted this, that most of New Zealand still believe that when John Key promised that he wouldn't put GST up, that he wouldn't do that. Most of New Zealand still believed that when the Hamilton City Council drafted this. But here they are, working out that they couldn't trust actually what the Prime Minister said at election time. They knew then that they couldn't trust him, and they were absolutely visionary. They've absolutely made sure that they were not going to be subject to the increased GST that the national government landed upon this country, everyone, for the 1st of October last year. And here was the Hamilton City Council, I imagine, drafting this probably before the incoming government, actually, to have got us to this stage in the House now. They would have been drafting this before the 2008 election, and here they are making absolutely sure that they weren't going to be subject to the national government's increased GST. Even though at the time they were drafting this, they would have been hearing John Key say that if he was elected as the Prime Minister, there would be no increased GST. They probably would have heard that, but look, clearly they saw what the Prime Minister, what the leader of the then leader of opposition was saying, but they didn't trust him. They did not trust him at his word, because they were when they were drafting this bill, making doubly sure that they weren't going to be paying with National's increased GST by having this land vested in them. If only the rest of New Zealand actually had the wisdom to see what the Hamilton City Council saw then. If they'd been able to look into the eyes of John Key when he said that he promised not to increase GST, and look into his eyes and go, no, he doesn't mean that, If only the rest of New Zealand actually had that wisdom, then we wouldn't have families facing the increased costs that they face today, with every single thing that they buy having increased GST on it. So petrol prices, food prices, you name it.
I call David Shearer.
It's coming towards the end of the session, but I just wanted to take a quick call on this Part 8, and as we pointed out before, Part 7 has quietly disappeared in the miscellaneous provisions, and it refers to the vesting of land and explicitly says not gift, supply of services or disposition of certain purposes. The vesting of land, Mr. Chair, is referring to the trusts of George Parr, the last will and testament of George Parr. And as I was looking at this and thinking, because it refers back to this in clause 5, I was thinking, I wonder what sort of trust this might be. And I can almost guarantee it wouldn't be a blind trust. It wouldn't be a blind trust where he was able to dip into his blind trust every now and then for whatever he wanted. This would have been one of those trusts that he set up as an honourable man, as a man with vision, a man with real compassion for his community, a man who saw the need, for example, for a rail link to Auckland. I mean, this is a man that we could easily vote as a Prime Minister. For example, a man that has a legal trust and has vision, who probably has a plan as well, Mr. Chair. This is a vesting of this land, and this is what, in fact, this bill does, which is to ensure that the land is vested for the people of the Waikato, in particular, the people of Hamilton. I want to touch on 8B, which is the vesting of land. A supply of service will not be subject to the Goods and Services Act of 1985. And I guess this makes this land, as I read it anyway, one of the few exceptions in this country where people will not have to, we will not have to pay GST on something, unlike everybody else in the Hamilton area who's paying GST on fuel prices, on their groceries, barely able to afford their groceries. And what we're seeing, Mr. Chair, with this is an exception being made. An exception is correct exception being made, but nevertheless an exception that doesn't apply to the rest of the people in New Zealand. And when the rest of the people of New Zealand are paying their GST and being promised that they'll be recompensed by a reduction in income tax, what they realise is that they've been cheated in that regard, and the people at the other end of the scale, the rich people in this country, the people who are wealthy, and I include the Prime Minister in that, are earning $1,000 more, Mr. Chair, as a result of that. Third point I want to raise on this bill is the fact that the vesting of this land has the agreement of the Tainui, Waikato Tainui. And we talked about this fact that this land is actually descended from the Raupatu in 1863. This land was actually historically taken land.
I regret to advise the member that it's come 9:55 and it's time for me to report progress.
The House has resumed. Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Speaker, the Committee on the Hamilton City Council Parana Park Land Vesting Bill reports progress. Mr. Speaker, I move that the report be adopted.
The question is that the report be adopted. Those of that opinion will say aye. If the contrary, no. It's agreed. The House now stands adjourned. This bill is set down for further consideration in committee next sitting day, and the House stands adjourned until 2 p.m. tomorrow. Good evening, everybody.